And now let's move on to different architectural designs of each movement or era. First, prehistoric or cave art. It is between 13,000 to 9,000 BC. These are paintings and engravings on the walls of caves and rock shelters, especially naturalistic depictions of animals, which were found between 40,000 to 14,000 years ago. It is considered to have a symbolic or religious function. Experts say that this was created with shamanic beliefs and practices. So, shamanic beliefs refers to religious practice that involves practitioner or shaman interacting with what they believe to be spirit world through altered state of consciousness such as trance. Let's move on to Mesopotamian. Mesopotamian was in 7th to 5th millennium BC. It features plasters and columns, as well as frescoes and enamel tiles, stones, bricks in their palaces, which are lined with sculptured, colored slab. It all began in region of Tigris-Euphrates river system, and the first permanent shelter was built in 6th century BC. It honors gods and goddesses who ruled different aspects of nature and important events. Here is an example. Let's move on to Chinese era. 16th century to 771 BC. Wood is the main material in ancient Chinese architecture. It has beautiful appearance, unique monomer shape, rich artistic images on roof, rigorous symmetric layout, decorations, graceful gardens with great artistic conception. Their ancient Chinese buildings can be traced back to Shang Dynasty from 16 to 771 BC. The incorporation of their idea is related to Feng Shui, such as directional hierarchies, horizontal emphasis, and allusions to various cosmos and other symbolism that are core view of Chinese design. Here is an example. Let's move on to Japanese era. It is from 17th to 19th century BC. It has been typified by wooden structures elevated slightly off the ground with lifted or touched roofs. Sliding doors were also used for internal configuration of space to be used in different occasions. Their architecture is typified as sedentary lifestyle of Japanese that serve as speed houses for production of clay pots in Jomon or Homon period. Construction was reflected to animist and Buddhist traditions. Japan's Shinto and Buddhist beliefs influenced their architecture with strong emphasis on human relationship with nature. Indian era, 18th century to 2nd century BC. Their motif is less ornate and more expressive in form. The materials are basics but cutting edge. The Mauryan period is considered as the beginning of the classical period of Indian architecture. The quality of their architecture is its spiritual content. It represents the concrete form of their prevailing religious consciousness. Their architecture is also mined materials in terms of rock, brick, and stone. Here is an example. Egyptian art, 31st BC to 4th AD. Their architecture is highly conservative adherence to traditional rules which favored order and form over creativity and artistic expression. Ancient Egyptian art flourished between 31st century BC and the 4th century AD. It included paintings, sculptures, drawings on papyrus, faience, jewelry, ivories, and other architectural designs on art and media. The statues of the greater gods used to be larger than the smaller deities. The sculptures and paintings of ancient Egypt all have a very finely and precisely carved faces and physical features. Egyptian art also portrays the supremacy and importance of Pharaoh and other political or religionary figures. Here is an example. Let's move on to Greek art from 23 BC to 30 AD. Its dimension used was whether the Doric, Ionic, or Corinthian style, depending on the region and the purpose of the architecture being built. Ancient Greek architecture came from the Greek or the Greek-speaking people called Hellenic people, whose culture flourished on the Greek mainland. Its intricate design suggests excellence and reaching one's full potential. It emphasized the importance of accomplishment of human beings. Even though much it was meant to honor the gods, those very gods were created as the image of humans. Next is the Islamic era from 7th to 8th century. Some characteristics of Islamic architecture were inherited from pre-Islamic architecture of the region, which some characteristics like minerals, makanas, arabesque Islamic, geometric pattern, pointed arc, multifoil arc, onion dome, and pointed dome developed later. Early Islamic architecture was influenced by Roman, Byzantine, Persian, and Mesopotamian architecture. It stemmed from the important role of reflecting the obedience and total submission to Almighty. Next is the Roman medieval art from 476 AD to 4th century. It combines the features of the ancient Roman and the Byzantine buildings and other local traditions. It is known by its massive quality, thick walls, round arches, sturdy pillars, barrel vaults, large lowers, and decorative arcading. In Roman art, it places heavy emphasis on theological view, with the possible exceptions of Avicenna and Averroes. Here is an example of an architectural design in Roman era. Let's move on to Romanesque era. It is from 10th to 11th century. It is known by its massive quality, thick walls, round arches, sturdy pillars, barrel vaults, large towers, and decorative arcading. It began in Europe from about mid-11th century to the advent of Gothic architecture. This was the fusion of the Roman, Carolingian, Othonian, Byzantine, and local Germanic traditions. Church buildings, arts, and sculptures were all used for the purpose of spreading the Christian gospel. People believed that holy relics had the power to do miracles. Next is Chamiz architecture from 12th to 16th century BC. Chamiz network architecture contains two parallel streams to estimate the similarity between two inputs and their ability to learn their discriminative features. The architecture of Tawavardi appeared in the central region of Thailand between 12th to 16th century. It used clay bricks. The constructions of the pagodas had a square base and inverted bell-shaped top with a spire. The Chamiz art greatly influenced the beliefs of Thai. It is the representation of their philosophical views on the presence of God in His creations. Let's move on to Gothic era. It is from 12th to 17th century. It varies according to location, age, and type of building, and is often characterized by 5 key architectural elements. These are large stained glass windows, pointed arches, ribbed vaults, flying buttresses, and ornate decorations. It began to proliferate in 2 to 17th centuries in northern France and England as a development of Norman architecture. The Gothic grew out of Romanesque architectural style when both prosperity and relative peace allowed for several countries of cultural development that affected the lives of people greatly. Let's move on to Renaissance era from 14th to 17th century. It is characterized by square or rectangular symmetrical shapes. The front facade or facade of the buildings were generally symmetrical around the vertical axis. It originated in Florence in the early 15th century and spread throughout the Europe, replacing the medieval Gothic style. Renaissance people had certain common values. Among them were humanism, individualism, skepticism, well-roundedness, secularism, classism, and patronage. Annyeonghaseyo! Let's move on to Korean era. It is from 14th century to 20th century. Its architectural motif is characterized by naturalistic tendencies, simplicity, economy of shape, and the avoidance of extremes. The founding of Joseon Dynasty in 1932 brought to power like-minded men steeped in doctrines of Neo-Confucianism, which had slowly percolated in Korea from China in the 14th century. Korean historical architecture embodies the splendor of form and symbolism in the dwellings of Korea's educated and elites. Elegant Koreans places painted bright and beautiful colors, robust mountain forests, and peaceful places of learning all combined elements of natural world. Let's move on to Byzantine. It is from 16th century to 1453. The combination of the basilica and symmetrical central plan or the circular or polygonal religious structures resulted in the characteristic of Byzantine Greek cross-plan church with a square central mass and forums of equal length. The pictorial and architectural styles that characterized Byzantine art first was codified in 6th century. Christian art had the triple purpose of beautifying a building, instructing the illiterate on matters vital for the welfare of their soul, and encouraging the faithful that they were on the correct path to salvation. Let's move on to Baroque era. It is from 16th century to 18th century. It includes curving forms including oval shapes and combinations of concave and convex forms that make walls seem undulate or appear wavy with a strong sense of motion. It originated in late 16th century Italy and lasting in some regions, notably Germany and colonial South America, until 18th century. It was linked to the Counter-Reformation celebrating the wealth of the Catholic Church. It was characterized by new explorations of forms, light and shadow, and dramatic intensity.